I would love to have one of these trees in my garden. For many of us, the most common relationship we'll have with trees is with our street trees. We walk around them. We often encounter them when we're walking our dogs or walking to the tram or walking along the road. And they're usually just standing there silently, scrubbing our air, giving us some shade and forming a general pleasing ambience that we may take for granted. You might not notice them until they change. They might flower or produce an interesting fruit. And then we start wondering what it is and maybe fall in love with it. Hi, I'm Robin, and normally I'm making videos about my small permaculture garden and featuring a different plant from my garden. But this week I'm taking it out to the verge and talking about a very popular and beautiful heritage street tree that is close to my heart, and also considering growing this tree in my own garden space. And so this episode I'm talking all about the most enchanting plant, the hawthorn, on the verge of the Federal Highway of Canberra. The scientific name for this plant is Crataegus, but it's more commonly known as hawthorn. The hawthorn variety that I'm interested in growing in my garden is called Crataegus smithiana. It's quite an upright tree, and it grows to about 4 to 5 meters in height, and it has quite a spreading aspect. And in summer the leaves are dark green and glossy, and you do get the beautiful spring flower, and in autumn it gets a showy orange-red blaze of leaves, then with the fruit hanging on in winter, and the fruit is orange and red in colour. It's a really dramatic tree. I've been weighing up the pros and cons of growing this plant in my garden context. All up, it's a very hardy plant. It's frost hardy and it can handle most climates except really hot districts, so it's great for my cool climate garden. It can handle most soil types. It likes full sun but will take part shade. Some of the cons is that it's not a small plant really. 4 to 5 meters in a small 600 meter square garden is a little challenging for sunshine stealing. But I do have this position that is occupied by a tree of similar size that is not producing, and that's this apricot tree. It's never produced a single piece of fruit in its life. So I do have a spot for it, and what I would consider doing is to trim this plant back towards the fence and train it along the top of the fence, kind of like a hedge on stilts. HAW in hawthorn, haw, means hedge in Old English, and the hawthorn responds very well to hedging, training and pruning. You can make up to about a 4 meter high hedge, or you can prune the plant as low as a meter. The fact that you can prune this plant hard means that it can have a space in my garden, but it will have to form part of the routine of keeping on top of a plant and not letting it get too big. Hawthorns tend to hold on to their berries into the winter, depending on the variety, and so you get these amazing tortured branches and the beautiful, colourful orange fruit. One of the interesting things about hawthorn is that it is purely a northern hemisphere plant, and it exists in that sort of temperate zone. There are no indigenous hawthorn plants to Australia, and there are so many different varieties that exist, and the plant travels across that whole northern hemisphere from Africa through to the Americas and Europe. I obviously won't go into all the varieties, there are hundreds. But the one that is probably the most problem for Australia is called Crataegus monogyna, and this variety is regarded as a noxious weed throughout large parts of Australia. It's definitely a weed in my region, so I would not be planting any variety that would be considered a danger to the local natural environment. What happens with a lot of plants is that the birds will eat the fruit and then drop the seeds into the local bushlands, and the plant grows quite invasively and squeezes out the indigenous plants. And so part of my research into the suitability and value of this plant in my garden is a consciousness that I don't want to plant something that will become a problem locally, as bushland is only a short walk from my house. The hawthorn has several key identifying features. The branches are twisted and thorny, and the thorns can be very sharp, and depending on the variety can be 2 to 8 centimetres long. The short shoots of the branches bear fruit at the ends. The branchlets coming out from the stem are typically growing alternately on the stem. The bark of the tree runs upwards, and as the tree gets older it becomes rough and scaly. The leaves can be quite different in shape, even on the same tree, but they're generally elliptic and have strong toothy edges. Some of the leaves can be deeply lobed. The flowers have 5 rounded petals and yellow or pink stamens, and the berries can be yellow, black, red or orange depending on the variety. The berries have a little 5-star calyx on the end, and on the other side a stalk, and usually these dots is a feature. There's a nutlet in the centre of the fruit, and these usually contain 2 seeds, although monogena variety is known to only have 1 seed. The hawthorn is a fruit rather than a berry, and the tree flowers once a year and is insect pollinated. It is important to know 100% that what you're eating is what you think you're eating. Hawthorn can be confused with crabapple and in Australia lily-pilly, and both these are edible, so in some ways that's not so bad. But cotoneaster is toxic, and it is also a little similar in appearance to hawthorn, and so make sure that you know 100% what you're eating if foraging. Let's talk about the edible qualities of this plant. The fruit is edible, but it varies in quality and size across the different varieties of hawthorn, and you would need to check your own variety to 100% know that it is edible and good to eat. You don't want to be eating any old red berries there. Hawthorn can be eaten raw, it can be dried, or it can also be used in jams and jellies and cakes. The only variety I've ever tried is the Smithiana variety, and it's not delectable. It's kind of like a very flowery, sweet apple. And I guess you're wondering why then I would want this plant to have as part of my edible garden. And the reason is it's high in pectin and it makes unbelievably good jam. And so the qualities of the fruit comes out in that processing. Hawthorn is not often a plant that is in high cultivation. It's a foraging plant. The closest to being in cultivation is probably the Mexican hawthorn varieties, where it features in a lot of different kinds of Mexican cuisine, including candida sweets. The azarole varieties, Crataegus azarole, are said to be the tastiest to actually eat. And the Smithiana plant that I'm interested in is actually a cross between the Mexican hawthorn and Crataegus azarole. It's often called a Mexican red. There is some local history to this particular variety in that it is said to have been cultivated by Yarralumla Nursery, which is a heritage nursery in Canberra, and in the 1920s and 30s. Canberra is very well known for its street trees, and in the 20s and 30s, some of the oldest streets in Canberra have Smithiana as part of its street tree landscape. This is a planned city that was established in 1913, and a heavily planned layout that was designed for a variety of purposes, including civic strolling. And the 2 architects and landscapers of Canberra is Walter Burley Griffin and his wife Marion Burley Griffin. And Marion Burley Griffin used to say, "I want some places in this town where the fairies can live." And the hawthorn is known for having fairy enchantment. The hawthorn has a lot of Celtic heritage and mythology for having fairies living in it. And the legend pretty much goes that if you cut down a hawthorn, the fairies will take some form of revenge upon you and you will have consequences. And so I know in the English landscape you'll often see lone hawthorn trees where people are loath to cut the tree down for fear of upsetting and disturbing fairies that live in the tree. I definitely find this tree enchanting. One of the things that's commonly said about hawthorn in its places of origin is that when there's nothing else, there's hawthorn, and is a great source of vitamins and minerals and health over a time when there's probably not much else to eat. There are some very good health benefits in the hawthorn plant. It's supposed to be very good for the heart and circulation, and also a sense of well-being. So possibly good for the heart in a kind of more metaphorical sense. You can also eat the flowers and leaves. These are supposed to have stronger medicinal qualities than the fruit. The fruit is considered a food as well as a medicine, and so it's very healthy and benign to eat. There are also Chinese varieties of hawthorn. This plant is traditionally used for digestive purposes in Chinese medicine. So as part of this journey, I'm making jam, and with that jam, I am going to make an upside down Hawthorn Jam Cake. But let's start with the jam. I actually ended up making 3 batches of jam, and the first batch I did the traditional same quantity of fruit as sugar. I used 500 grams of hawthorn berries, 500 grams of sugar. With the subsequent batches I had 700 grams of hawthorn fruit, 500 grams of sugar, and in my last batch I added lime just to balance out the sweet a little. Hawthorn berries are quite sweet, give the jam a little tart as well. It's important when making the jam to get rid of the nutlets. They are super hard, like shrapnel within the jam if you leave them in. And also, like apple pips, they have a toxin that is probably inconsequential if you eat a little bit, and especially if you don't chew on it, just goes straight through you. But you don't want to chomp down on a mass of those seeds. I've seen people processing the berries by sieving the fruit, and that means you're able to get the pips out of the jam with a little more speed. However, I wanted to keep the fruit a little bit intact in my jam, and also the fruit is pretty ripe, and you're able just simply to squish the nutlets out, and it's a bit of a labour of love. And I'm going to say I listened to a fair bit of an audio book in the process. And you also need to get rid of the calyx and stem, obviously, in this production. The jam is ready when it starts to thicken, and you can do a test on a frozen plate to see if it's setting when the mixture cools down. One last note is the fruit does brown off like apples when you are prepping, but it does retain its colour for the jam. And now for the cake. Oh.
That's the birthday. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday.
So obviously you can tell I'm a fan and I want one for my garden, but I only really want the Smithiana variety. And I did do quite a search to see if I could source one. The main propagation for hawthorn appears to be by grafting. The typical graft stock is the Washington hawthorn or the monogenea, and I am talking to somebody who has some Washington hawthorn graft stock and Smithiana coming through in early summer, and so I will likely pursue the graft as a way of having Smithiana. But as an insurance and experimental side to this, my sister and I are going to try and propagate the seeds. I understand the seeds are sterile, but there are people out there in internet land who say they're not, so I'll have a go. It's a 2-year process to germinate the seeds, and so a bit of a labour of love, but it'll be a bit of a fun experiment. And so I can see there might be a Hawthorn hashtag too at some point into the future when I get my plant. But at least at the moment, I have my beautiful street trees to walk past and say hello to. And so I'm going to leave you with 93-year-old artist Joyce and friends exploring the beauty of the hawthorn through art. And thank you for all the subscriptions and comments. I read all of them. Thank you for watching all the way through to the end if you got to this far, and I hope to see you in the next episode. Bye.